As the Bagleys were finishing and the Benhams were under construction, the U.S. started another new class of destroyer, the 12 ships of the 1,720-ton Sims class. As with most ships, this class was an evolution of previous classes with some differences. By far, the most important was their adoption of the new Mark 37 gun director. Even in the age of sailing, it had been realized that having the people aiming a ship's guns stationed at the guns, called local control, was impractical due to the curve of the Earth. The people aiming the guns needed to be as high as possible, but for stability reasons, the heavy gun mounts had to be as low as practical. The result was at or near the top of the superstructure was a spotter who could sight the enemy and pass their bearing, range, speed, and course to a control room where the trigonometry could be done to tell the gunners where to point their guns and when to shoot. Sounds simple, right? Just remember, not only is the target ship radically maneuvering to throw off your aim, but so is yours to throw off his. Add to that, the ship is moving in a fluid medium known as water. Not only are both ships moving, presumably as fast as they can, but they're also rolling side to side and pitching forward and backward. Additionally, you have to take into account the weather and other such things. Are you doing this at night? All this math has to be done quickly on the fly, while the other guy is doing the same thing. Usually, the guy that gets it right first lives. Now, your target is an airplane. Harder to see because it's much smaller. It travels 300 miles per hour instead of 30, and can move in 3 dimensions instead of 2. The U.S.'s solution was the Mark 37. At the heart of the system was a mechanical computer buried deep in the ship. Now, all that annoying math stuff could be done almost instantly and far more accurately than any person could hope to, as long as the information passed on from the spotters was correct. Even this was improved in December 1941 when Morris became the first destroyer to add radar to the spotter station. Especially in the heat of combat or at night, a person can misjudge the distance, bearing, course, speed, and elevation of a target. Radars don't. Another advantage was that this radar-computer combination could be set to lock onto and track a specific target, continuing to aim at it until the target is destroyed. The upshot of this was that with the Mark 37, U.S. ships could detect targets with radar accuracy and generate targeting data with nearly instantaneous computer efficiency. So you have eyes that can range perfectly day or night in any weather. These are attached to a brain that can instantly do the math. The only thing left is controlling the guns. This was accomplished with remote power control, or RPC. Guns down to the 40mm size generally had to be in power-operated mounts anyway due to their weight. It was a small matter to attach their controlling motors to the computer. The final piece of the puzzle was the proximity-fused shell, which, thanks to a built-in radar, knew when it was close enough to a target to detonate. All 12 Sims were started between July 15, 1937 and June 7, 1938, entering service between May 19, 1939 and May 15, 1940. Main armament was initially 5 5-inch 38 caliber guns in 5 single mounts, 2 forward, 1 midship, and 2 aft. Guns 1, 2, and 5 were in enclosed turrets, with guns 3 and 4 in open mounts. 12 torpedo tubes were carried in 3 quadruple midship mounts, 1 on the center line and 1 on either side. Depth charges at the stern rounded out their initial armament. Propulsion was again 3 boilers venting to 1 funnel that produced 50,000 horsepower to 2 shafts, driving the ships up to 38 knots. Even before the U.S. entered World War II, these ships had their main armament revised. The midship 5-inch gun was replaced with more light anti-aircraft guns, and the torpedoes were changed to a pair of quadruple mounts on the center line, allowing them to still fire 8 torpedoes off either side for only 2/3 of the weight. Late in the war, as the kamikaze threat grew, the survivors landed 1 or both of their torpedo mounts to make way for more light and medium anti-aircraft guns. All were in the Atlantic when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Sims transferred to the Pacific with the carrier Yorktown and escorted her until the Battle of the Coral Sea. While escorting the oiler Neosho on May 7, 1942, she was hit by 3 bombs and sunk. Hughes transferred to the Pacific with the carrier Yorktown, protecting convoys and escorting carriers, notably at the battles of Midway, Santa Cruz, and both naval battles of Guadalcanal. From mid-April to late August 1943, he operated in the Aleutians before returning to the fleet. Off Leyte on December 10, 1944, she was hit by a kamikaze that badly damaged her engine room. With repairs complete in mid-June 1945, she returned to the Aleutians and spent the rest of the war advancing on Japan from the north. Anderson joined the Pacific Fleet in early February 1942, protecting convoys and escorting carriers, notably at the battles of the Coral Sea, Midway, Santa Cruz, and both naval battles of Guadalcanal. From late July to late September 1943, she operated in the Aleutians before returning to the fleet. On January 1, 1944, she was hit by shore fire, killing her captain. 2 days later, she grounded, sending her back to Hawaii for repairs. Following repairs off Leyte on November 1, 1944, she was hit by a kamikaze that sent her back to the west coast. With repairs complete in mid-May 1945, she returned to the Aleutians and spent the rest of the war advancing on Japan from the north. Hammond transferred to the Pacific with the carrier Yorktown and escorted her until the end. On June 6, 1942, while alongside the damaged Yorktown, both ships were hit by submarine torpedoes. She jackknifed and sank. Mustin joined the Pacific Fleet in mid-February 1942. Until mid-April 1943, she mostly protected convoys and escorted carriers, most notably Hornet at Santa Cruz and Enterprise during the naval battles of Guadalcanal. From late April till August 1943, she operated in Alaskan waters. Returning to the fleet, she spent the rest of the war escorting carriers, providing fire support, and protecting supply ships. She was in overhaul when the war ended. Russell joined the Pacific Fleet in early January 1942. Until May of 1943, she escorted the carriers at the Coral Sea, Midway, Santa Cruz, and through the fighting around Guadalcanal. She spent August and September 1943 in the Aleutians before returning to the fleet. She spent the rest of the war escorting carriers and providing fire support. She was also in overhaul when the war ended. O'Brien joined the Pacific Fleet with the battleship Idaho in late January 1942. She escorted convoys until mid-September 1942. On December 15, 1942, she was escorting the carrier Wasp and the battleship North Carolina when all 3 were hit by submarine torpedoes. 4 days later, while sailing back to the west coast for repairs, she literally shook herself apart and sunk. Walk transferred to the Pacific with the carrier Yorktown, missing the battles of the Coral Sea and Midway due to a broken reduction gearing. Returning to the action, she took part in the overnight Second Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, where she was hit by a torpedo and medium-caliber shells. With her bow blown off and fires raging, the abandoned ship was given and she was scuttled. Morris joined the Pacific Fleet in late January 1942. Until May of 1943, she escorted the carriers at the Coral Sea, Midway, Santa Cruz, and throughout the fighting around Guadalcanal. She spent May through November 1943 in the Aleutians before returning to the fleet. On April 6, 1945, she was hit by a kamikaze between guns 1 and 2. Returning to the west coast in mid-June 1945, she was judged not worth repairing. While the first 9 ships quickly transferred to the Pacific, Roe, Wainwright, and Buck stayed in the Atlantic. All 3 escorted convoys in early 1942, with Wainwright escorting PQ-17. On August 22, 1942, Buck collided with an oiler. Repairs were completed in November 1942. Meanwhile, Roe and Wainwright took part in the torch landings. All 3 participated in the Sicilian invasion, where, on July 10, 1943, Roe collided with Swanson. Repairs would last until mid-September 1943. Wainwright and Buck moved on to cover the invasion of Italy. On October 9, 1943, Buck was hit by at least 1 U-boat torpedo and quickly sank. In March 1944, Roe joined the Pacific Fleet with Wainwright, following in mid-June 1945. Roe was in overhaul when the war ended.